Well, Happy New Year, Adriana, and welcome back to the Sanford Hall Report. And we welcome all our viewers to this New Year's edition of the Sanford Hall Report. Again, we don't tell you what to think, but we challenge you to think, because a thinking individual makes better choices for themselves, for their family, for their community, and of course, on this topic, better decisions in their corporations and businesses. And boy, do we have a topic that every corporation, board member, every member of the C-suite, CEOs, CIOs should be thinking about as we talk about cybersecurity, the hybrid workforce, and the challenges that this pandemic has produced.
Cross-cultural communication and this online cultural experience and how to weave people together, it's going to be really, really hot in 2021.
I agree with you 100%. And I also think we have to look at the character and the responsibility and accountability of our workforce as they work from a distance, whether it be from a home or the local Starbucks or what have you. Now, today, Adriana, I spoke to a good friend who's the CEO of a manufacturing corporation, and he stated emphatically, we are not going back to the old workforce. We're not going back to our old ways. Going forward, there will always be a hybrid workforce and with distance workers. So that produces many challenges.
Right, and it's depending on your industry, depending on the business. You know, you may have some companies that are completely remote. You may have others that have a partial remote, or you may have this hybrid version, where, you know, some people are 2 days in and 3 days out of the office. So there are a whole bunch of different structures and different ways of looking at this new workforce, this future workforce. And depending on your company, there may be one that's right for you.
Oh, absolutely. And the challenges going forward are many. I talked to the IT department of a major manufacturer of computer parts and things of that nature. They were experimenting with work from home prior to March 2020. And then when the pandemic hit and they went remote workforce, wow, they realized they weren't totally prepared. And so the IT department said they're defending against exterior attacks on their cyber attacks as well as interior attacks. And so the challenges are character of employees working from home. Are they using the VPN? Are they using proper cyber hygiene? There are engineers that are working on a project. Do they go, oh, this is interesting, I'm going to put it over on my personal computer? So there's many challenges. And in smaller corporations, like you said, many individuals aren't that cyber savvy or computer savvy, and all of a sudden they have to work remotely and they've got a original Windows computer at home. So there's many challenges.
Mm-hmm. Those security challenges are huge, and also leadership challenges, because just because you know how to manage a workforce, a traditional workforce, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are trained or that you even understand how to manage this new hybrid version. And you need to make sure that everybody is participating. If you're having a hybrid meeting, you know, are the individuals that are online able to participate, or do they feel like they're taking a back seat? And, you know, do you have the right technology in place? What happens if you see a child running by the screen? You know, there's just so many different issues out there, and a lot of individuals that are trained to lead and are trained to manage may stumble here, because you really have to make sure that those that are online are feeling part of it. You know, it goes from having donuts, you know, at the table and, you know, and eating donuts and putting those stickers up on the board, to making sure that they really feel like they're part of the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you've seen articles on the internet about Zoom fatigue and video conference fatigue, Microsoft Teams fatigue. And I'll tell you, that does present a leadership challenge. And I would challenge all leaders, all line supervisors, that instead of doing video, sometimes it's more intimate to just pick up the phone and talk by phone. It creates a better relationship and, again, makes that person feel included in the conversation. But hey, Adriana, we could go on and on and on about these broad topics. So why don't we take a deeper dive into some of these topics and bring some internationally renowned experts into the Sanford and Hall report. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea.
All right, let's go get them and bring them on board. And we're back with our 4 distinguished guests. Over to you, Adriana.
Thanks, Gary. So right now what we're looking at is that bridge, the bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. There is a vaccine that's available. The COVID vaccine is being distributed in many countries, and we're going to see effective treatments that will open the possibility for a lot of businesses to start going back or requesting their employees to return to the traditional workplace. Now, this is a challenge because we have seen what it's like to work remotely. And in order to attract and retain top talent, we're noticing that there's a new space available, a new remote workforce. It's a hybrid workplace. And nearly half of the employees out there today are working remotely or will in some way work remotely in 2021. So we need to take a look at this hybrid model, and we need to understand a little bit more of why it's being used. It's obviously better to recruit and to keep talent, but it's also very, very good in order to achieve innovation and has a more creative value to it, because you're not only looking in one local jurisdiction for your employees, but rather the world. So today we are inviting certain guests to speak about some of the challenges that you're going to be facing in 2021 and what these companies are doing to design the future workspace that is more flexible and more digital. The leaders that we have different experiences and different expertise, but together we will walk through some of the challenges in this new space.
Yes, Adriana, excellent points. I think it would behoove our viewers to understand a little bit more about the experience of our guests. In fact, I think our first guest comes from Israel, where they are experts in cybersecurity. So, Esti, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience?
So, hello everyone from Israel. By way of introduction, my name is Esti Peshin. I'm a Vice President and General Manager of the Cyber Division of Israel Aerospace Industries, IAI. Israel, as I'm sure you all know, is considered a leader in cybersecurity, especially in developing state-of-the-art cybersecurity technology and in developing the operational methodology on how to use this technology effectively in order to combat cyber threats, in order to prevent cyber threats, in order to create a safer cyber world. Prior to joining IAI in 2013, I held various executive roles in cybersecurity companies and defense companies in the Israeli ecosystem. We're a relatively small ecosystem, so we know everyone who is anyone. I also held the role of the Director General of the Israeli High-Tech Caucus in the Israeli Parliament. So I had a lot of experience in the Israeli high-tech industry, being able to get a grasp of how this industry works well. And I'm very, very excited to be with you here tonight.
Thank you very much, Esti. We're excited to have you on board today. And from Microsoft Teams, we have Aanchal Gupta. Why don't you say hello, Aanchal?
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here. I am Vice President of Engineering for Microsoft Azure platform, which is the cloud offering. Prior to this, I was with Facebook as their Chief Information Security Officer for their cryptocurrency initiative, known as Novi now. Prior, it was Calibra, and many people know it by Libra as overall initiative. I'm a boomerang to Microsoft. So before Facebook, I was with Microsoft for 5 years as CISO for Skype and Skype for Business. And before then, Yahoo for quite some time doing identity engineering. So my career is, I have spent sort of dual roles. Started my career as a software engineer, was engineering leader for almost more than a decade, and then pivoted to security. So I feel like the diversity of experiences is what defines me, and it's also what I'm super passionate about.
Oh, that's great news. We need diversity in all areas of business and in life in general. And you are definitely a prime example to our young women out there searching and seeking to go into STEM programs. Our next guest, some describe as a man who is out of this world. NASA astronaut José Hernández, please say hello.
Thank you, Gary. Hello, everybody. Happy to be here. Very excited to participate today. And as Gary mentioned, I'm a former NASA astronaut. I had the privilege of flying to the International Space Station aboard Space Shuttle Discovery as the flight engineer on STS-128 mission. Prior to that, I was the branch chief of the Materials and Processes branch at NASA Johnson Space Center, and our group was dedicated to performing failure analysis of materials and forensics activities of materials. And because of that, we had the honor of working with the Columbia Accident Investigation Board for the Columbia failure of the shuttle and helped find the root cause of the accident as a result. Prior to that, my previous life, I had 15 years at Department of Energy Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, where I worked in the nuclear non-proliferation arena and traveled extensively to Russia, helped the Russians take control of their nuclear stockpile. And also very proud of the project that I've worked early in my career, was one of the co-developers of the first full-field digital mammography system for the early detection of breast cancer. So I have had a very nice career and looking forward to contributing more to our society.
Well, thank you very much, Jose. That certainly is a diverse career, from science and technology into outer space and working with the nuclear program. I also think it's very helpful, your work with Columbia, to discern lessons learned, and which can be very valuable in today's environment. And now, last but not least, from Intel, Jim Gordon.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this today. So I work for Intel. I've been at the company for 23 years in a variety of roles, ranging from product leadership to most recently cybersecurity strategy. And currently I'm leading Intel's economic recovery strategy and investments for what it calls the Pandemic Technology Response Initiative. That's Intel's consolidated effort to contribute to, through our own technology, but also through enabling our technology ecosystem, contribute to improve the outcomes as we all proceed through the COVID pandemic. My particular role in that is to help companies get back to work and to stay at work through this COVID pandemic, and do so in a way that keeps them contributing to the world economy. Finally, I'm heavily involved in gender equality and diversity and inclusion at Intel and in the technology industry. So thank you for the invitation to be here today.
All right, another person with great diversity in their background. Adriana, why don't you kick us off here with, I think you have some specific questions to discuss.
Sure. The backgrounds that we have are complement one another. And I'd like to start with Jim, and he mentions economic recovery. Right now, a lot of countries are looking at solutions and how to tackle this pandemic. And part of tackling this pandemic is not only that vaccine, but learning how to deal with this new workspace so that our companies and our citizens can actually get back on their feet. Now, Jim mentioned what Intel is doing with regards to economic recovery and helping these companies. Jim, could you give us a little bit more information with regards to some of the companies that you're seeing or some of the businesses that are actually approaching Intel and what they're doing in that space?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to start off by saying that I think we've all learned something that we, I think, deep down already knew, which is the health of the citizens of the United States and other countries is really closely tied to the economy in ways that we maybe fully didn't understand initially. So when the economy is doing well, health outcomes are, generally speaking, more positive. Conversely, when the economy is struggling, health suffers. And the same in the other direction as well. In this case, with the pandemic, people's health in jeopardy, businesses have suffered. So it's a really complex and connected relationship between those two sides of the same coin, some would say. And so one of the challenges that businesses had has been to understand the rules that they're given to operate under, to stay legal, and to stay in a position where they're healthy, have healthy operations for their employees and for their customers and for their partners, and in an environment where sometimes we don't have all the data, and sometimes the rules are changing around us. So one of the things we realized early on was that technology can help, and it should help companies get back into operation, stay in operation, stay legal, and stay healthy for all involved. And to your question, we've had partners and customers from all different industries approach us to partner for solutions that are intended to help with all of this, ranging from the airline industry around, for example, technology to help customers and airlines operate in flight in a more healthy way, to give people confidence that they are in good hands and are going to have better health outcomes, to basic research for surface technology to repel or even destroy the virus when it hits surfaces, to everything in between, including, for example, touchless operations in businesses ranging from museums to retail. So really, technology is able to help us accomplish things and get through this pandemic in ways that, at least right now, we could have not done even 5 years ago. So it's pretty exciting to see.
And it's interesting, what you're saying is basically we took a huge step or a jump forward, and through this pandemic we were kind of forced to take that step, and those that have been able to embrace those technologies are really able to move forward. Unfortunately, though, there are some jurisdictions or some countries that are not ready or were not ready to take that jump and are struggling now, and we believe will be struggling even more in 2021 when we continue in this space and we start to see partnerships being formed between businesses in different countries and different jurisdictions, because let's face it, we're global now, and this may actually put some countries at a real big disadvantage if they don't have a strong cybersecurity ecosystem. And those that do can embrace those technologies, those emerging technologies that will continue to develop and push us forward. But we would really like to look at some of those ecosystems that are out there.
Adriana, I think that that's a perfect setup for Esti, who comes from Israel with a high level of cybersecurity, probably working in an environment with those that are still at the crawl, not even walk stage. Esti, what's your thoughts on the ecosystem?
Okay, so first, let's understand what is a national cyber ecosystem, or what nation states need to do in order to establish themselves in cyber. And then we'll try to understand together how cybersecurity can actually move the needle on national GDP. So in terms of the cyber ecosystem, you need basically 5 elements. Number one, technology, state-of-the-art technology. There's a growing number of cyber threats. You need to be able to protect your ecosystem against these threats. The fact that more and more of us are moving to a work-from-home framework just increases the threats. So we're seeing a host of new cyber attacks on a daily basis. We need a technology in order to combat it. But technology on its own is not sufficient. Technology that is not used properly isn't effective. So you need a methodology as well. Now, cybersecurity is evolving. So we need to evolve along with the domain. The threats are evolving, the solutions are evolving. So we need to employ constant innovation. And this is the third point, constant innovation. We need collaboration. Adriana mentioned this because when we build an ecosystem, we need to build it within our nation state, but also internationally. So we need collaboration on national and both on an international level. Just by way of example, IAI is the leader of the Israeli Cyber Companies Consortium. This is a consortium of 13 Israeli companies delivering together end-to-end cyber solutions. Israel is also, IAI is also the leader of the Israeli Aviation Cybersecurity Consortium, delivering solutions for protecting the commercial aviation industry. So collaboration is our fourth point. And the last one, and I think one of the most important points, is capacity buildup. Building the national resilience, building the national know-how, building the national capabilities. And here I'm going to make the most important point. For developing countries, cyber can actually move the needle on the GDP. And here's how. In 2019, a report was published by the CSIS, by the Center for Strategic Studies, showing a shortage of more than 300,000 jobs in the US related to cybersecurity. Now, taking an average of $200,000 a year for a cybersecurity expert, this means that nation states that develop enough cyber experts can actually contribute significantly into their GDP. Now, a recent report, just recently published, the ISC report that was published in 2020, shows a global shortage of, and this is huge, more than 3 million cybersecurity jobs. So there's a huge shortage of cybersecurity experts. Nation states that, for example, build a cyber academy and train cyber experts can provide these services globally. As you mentioned earlier, the world is a global world now. Services can be provided from developing countries to developed countries, for example. And again, taking an average $200,000 a year for a trained cyber expert, this means that if you generate enough cyber experts within your nation state, you can actually move the needle on the GDP. So these are my thoughts on the ecosystem.
Esti, those are excellent points. And what stuck out at me is talking about it's the person in the loop. It's not just the technology. And therefore, if the character of the person in the loop is of poor character, we have cybersecurity issues. And I think, Jose, you can probably talk about character of those that you're working with, because you don't go into space based totally on technology, but the people in the process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, Garry. I agree with Esti in the sense that we need constant innovation to have as part of the cyber ecosystem in the processes and software development and the talent. But we also need a diverse set of participants with government leading the way. You need private companies embracing it, nonprofits, and now a new member of this diverse pool of participants is the home office infrastructure that needs to be put in there. Now, the governments need to lead this effort, and if they're going to attract investment into their countries, they need to invest in this, because this is now a new area that companies who originally want to expand into another country is they look at the cost of doing business, the pipeline of the talent, and the tax incentives, and now they're going to be looking at, hey, what kind of cyber ecosystem exists in that area? And so that's a new area that we need to look at, that these countries need to invest in. Now, for developed countries, it's relatively easy, because developed countries invest between 2 and 3% of their GDP in science and technology, which developing a good cyber ecosystem is part of. Now, in underdeveloped countries, there's where the problem lies, because they're only investing less than 0.5% of the GDP. And unfortunately, there lies the conundrum in the sense of saying we need them to invest more in these areas. The problem with that is the fact that a lot of these investments I always tie it to the election cycle, is that a lot of these investments that we want them to make, the fruits of those investments or their labor does not come until after a full election cycle. So a lot of, they're under pressure to be able to produce while they're in office, and are very reluctant to invest in technologies and invest in science because of that reason. And so there lies the problem, that the big challenge that we have for these other countries that don't have a healthy, viable cyber ecosystem, that we need them to make sure that they do develop and invest in that area.
Yeah, it's very difficult to convince people to invest in cyber technology when they need consistent power, fresh water, and basic needs like that in some of these developing countries. But both Esti and Jose talked about diversity, and our next two guests, as Aanchal said, she's passionate about diversity, and Jim said he works with gender equality and gender diversity. So Aanchal, why don't you give us your thoughts on diversity in cybersecurity?
Yeah, the way I see this is, Garry, that we cannot be protecting our diverse customers without having diverse teams. Because if you don't have diverse teams, you don't even understand the diverse challenges they face every day. So you have to totally reflect in your teams that diversity. With pandemic, it has become significantly harder because a lot of things that were supported by the infrastructure, I should say, like we have daycare support, we had schools, now all of this is remote. So there are more responsibilities on one of the parents, possibly women of the household, to take care of kids. And as a result, it is becoming harder and harder to bring the diverse groups together. But on the flip side, some things have made it easier. Like now you can have a remote workforce. Earlier you had to literally relocate people to the same location because everyone was at the same location meeting in person. Now people have become more comfortable with the idea of, okay, my team is fairly distributed. We all get on some, like for Microsoft, we get on Microsoft Teams calls, and it feels like we are all connected throughout the day. Other thing that I do want to highlight for companies which are building cybersecurity teams is the bug bounty program. And so I don't know if many people have heard about this. As part of bug bounty program, what you do is you provide a framework where when security researchers identify any vulnerabilities in your product and services, they report it to you, and then you reward them for identifying those issues, because it gives you a chance to address these issues before they can be exploited by the bad guys. So I was just looking at some of the numbers for Microsoft bug bounty program, and over the last 12 months, we have paid bug bounty to researchers from 55 different countries. Now, imagine building a cybersecurity program where you want to build your teams in 55 different countries. How challenging can that become? Versus you having this global strength of security researchers helping you with their diversity from wherever they are based. So I think if companies are really looking to scale with that, that's one way they can definitely start with. And it also keeps these issues away from dark web. Gets those issues quickly to the vendors and the service providers so they can address these very quickly.
Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned that really caught my attention was about you previously having childcare. In my own family life, my daughter and her husband both work for home and have a 3-year-old, and the 3-year-old doesn't call for daddy, but calls for mommy. And so that causes issues of how they time share in their own homes and do their work. So Jim, can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing, what Intel's doing on gender diversity?
Just a few comments on what the other panelists have mentioned, and then I'll talk briefly about that. Overall, cybersecurity is both the great enabler and the great inhibitor. So cybersecurity and privacy are both integral to all the things that Intel and the technology industry and and the ecosystem that we're investing in is trying to put in place. To Esti's comment, all this get back to work or go back to the treatment or get back to your normal life, won't work if it's enabled by technology that people don't trust from either a security standpoint or from their personal information privacy. And so that's something that we all have to take a close look at and not ever forget, especially now. To Jose's comment, he referred to what I would say is the digital or cyber divide. Countries that have and countries that have not a great infrastructure around cybersecurity. And both from an economic standpoint and also from a cybersecurity standpoint, I think that if we're not careful, that divide is going to get larger and wider during this pandemic, as those that have it are able to accomplish more and to recover faster and to gain share against those that do not have it. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us and all the companies we represent to make sure that doesn't happen. But in order to do that, you have to recognize that it could happen. And then lastly, to Aanchal's comments, and this is to your question to me, innovation, different approaches, those are things that lead to both new breaches, if you're a bad guy, and they are also things that lead to new protective technologies and approaches. And so what I've always believed around gender, but also diversity overall, is that a homogenous security industry will always, and has always historically, lost to a diverse attacker ecosystem. And so one of the things I encourage companies to do in this context and also in general business is to be your customer. Be comprised of the type of people and the type of talent that you serve. And from Intel's perspective, that means every country, every gender, every background, we serve them. And so we need to be very careful and very diligent about making sure that we are comprised of employees and suppliers that that are comprised of the same groups. So it's really an integrated approach.
I was going to say this is a very interesting space because, all of these issues that we have can either be an advantage or a disadvantage. The ability to have this hybrid means you have the ability to be more flexible, to attract more women, and to figure out which hours work and which hours don't work. You're going to have to be extremely creative, though, because you can't have everybody working Tuesday through Thursday. So you need to be able to be flexible enough and understand people's schedules so that you can flow, in and out of that business. But at the same time, the ability to have a hybrid means you can basically have people working on a 24-hour schedule because someone somewhere in the world is up. So you can actually be more productive and more creative than you ever have been before. If you are able to schedule certain people, working at certain times, like for example, Esti right now, it's very late for her. And, depending on where individuals are located, this could be extremely advantageous if you do it the right way. But these are all elements, these are all points that you really have to take a look at. And it's going to require work in putting it together, but it can really, really be to the benefit of any country and those businesses and those citizens if you can get it all together.
Yes, this pandemic is kind of like 9/11. We're still taking off our shoes at the airport, so we're not going to go back to the way we were. I hate to use the phrase that's used over and over again, is the new normal. But many people are talking about the 3-2-2, 3 days on site, 2 days work from a remote location and 2 days off. Aanchal, you seem to be leaning into this. Do you have any comments on this new hybrid workforce?
I was just going to comment on what Adriana was saying, that we call it like follow the sun model. Especially when you are leading a cybersecurity team, there are security incidents that you have to respond to, and it's always best if you have teams in different time zones who can do the work 24/7 collectively versus just a set of team in one location and they have to be working 24/7. It makes it that much more harder, and to find that work-life balance for them for a longer stretch of time. So at Microsoft, we definitely have this model, and it helps tremendously.
Follow the sun. I didn't know the name, the terminology. That's great. I love it.
Great.
Well, that also goes to, again, in the hybrid workforce, character of the individuals and cultural understanding, because many countries, yes, working 12 hours to cover 24 hours a day, you're working with a country that's 12 hours away. So you have to understand the cultural aspects as well as the technological aspects.
And Garry, when you guys talk about a hybrid model, it doesn't have to be hybrid individual based, because there's going to be some jobs where nearly 100% can be done from home. And so you're going to have those type of individuals that you're going to find that are going to be working from home. The one thing that does concern me, and maybe Esti can ask about this or answer this question or comment on it, is the actual threats that we're going to be facing when we're working from a home office, because now you have technology, you have information that's sensitive, and you're not at your company firewall anymore. You're at your home firewall. And how do you reinforce that to make sure that you're not vulnerable? And all of a sudden, there's this big ransomware demand for Microsoft or somebody else that they're holding this something very valuable to you, or you don't want to divulge to the public.
Absolutely. My son is an IT security specialist with a major corporation and is having that issue. But Jim, you wanted to make a comment.
I think I already did in my last.
But yeah, many corporations were experimenting with the remote workforce, hybrid workforce, but then they were thrown into it full bore. And I know a major corporation is, being attacked all the times. And you have, again, I keep coming back to character, but if you have engineers working from home and they're working on a project on their work computer, but say, oh, this is something I think I would like to keep in my own computer, and now you have a breach. Esti, you're kind of smiling at that. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, before I relate to the issue of why working from home has become a bit more dangerous in terms of cybersecurity, I would like to refer to a comment. I think Jim made a comment of follow your customer, and you mentioned earlier the man in the loop. And we need to understand that cybersecurity is more about understanding human beings than about understanding technology, because the human factor is still the #1 threat. And just to give you an example, there was a huge increase in the number of phishing attempts during the pandemic period, because people were starving for information about the pandemic. So they were looking practically at any bit of information that was coming to them. And then there were so many new bogus domains related to the pandemic that were malicious. So people were receiving information, tapping on the link, entering the website, and then malware was propagating into their computers. So cybersecurity is the art of understanding human beings in a sense. And this relates very, very strongly to the fact that we need a diverse workforce in order to be able to understand also our adversaries. We need a diverse workforce in order to be able to understand our customers and to be able to offer them the right solutions that they will use against the adversaries.
This is what I love about getting a group together, because everyone feeds off of everyone else and it just leads us down the path. The comment that José made, which is some are staying remote, and actually Siemens, I think, has 140,000 employees that they said we will stay remote. There are still those that are in this pandemic and have to stay remote for that reason. And Esti's comment about that human factor is so important, because if you are remote or you're staying remote, you better make sure that you're keeping your employees happy. And that I think, there are some businesses that are actually finding different ways to make sure that their employees are productive. Some of those work, some of them don't work when you are in a remote workspace. And this brings us into a whole other area, which is the legal side, which we're not even talking about right now, but the GDPR, the CCPA, and all of these different regulations with regards to privacy, with regards to how to handle data, all comes into play with the remote workforce and with this hybrid workforce that's coming up. And in that space, the only point I want to bring up now, because that is a whole other topic, is the monitoring of these employees and their productivity is a huge issue right now. Because with the emerging technologies, we have companies that are videotaping their employees. We have other ones that are keeping track of how many keystrokes there are, or whether they're sitting in their chairs. All of these issues obviously can result if you're hiring individuals from different jurisdictions. You've got different laws which may conflict or compete with one another. But on top of that, it also affects that employees and how their morale, because productivity is not only seen through how many steps, whether I'm at my seat or not, but rather, the critical thinking element and all of these other things. All of a sudden, that employee may no longer be happy or feel productive because of the way you're monitoring their productivity. So to that point, if your employees are not happy or are frustrated at home because of the technology that you're using to make sure they're productive, you may actually end up with a cybersecurity issue as well, because they're clicking on things and they're not as alert, or they may just be very frustrated. So that all of this kind of fits together, and it's really, really important. So I kind of wanted to just kind of lead with that off Esti's remark on making sure they're happy. This all comes together with whatever space you're using. Make sure you're following the laws, make sure you understand what the laws are, and explain to your employee why you're monitoring the way you are, and maybe offer them the opportunity to see what you're doing so that they're actually happy.
Aanchal?
Yeah, I want to touch a little bit upon what Adriana said about what is the role that government plays. And I think Esti also mentioned a little bit about it. With this changing space, our life is so intertwined now, like the work life, the personal life. It's no more that separate life. We all are using our home Wi-Fi, home routers to connect to work, to do our day-to-day job. And earlier, we never worried about what are the different Internet of Things, IoT devices we are connecting to our home network. And because that's totally a separate life, we were making our smart homes comfortable with these smart plugs and smart appliances, but we never really thought too much about, are these things safe? What are the basic standards and guidelines these IoT devices follow when it comes to cybersecurity? So that has become totally a new vector for us. And I'm happy within US, at least there is a new law that has been passed. They say it's the Internet of Things Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020. And this is slightly narrow than probably what we would expect. It specifically focuses on federal agencies and says that NIST is going to publish guidelines and standards on the cybersecurity requirements for IoT devices. And federal agencies have to make sure that anything that they use within their environment has to comply with these NIST standards. So I personally feel that this is a step in the right direction, because our users should not have to know. When you buy a car, you really don't have to see and check, oh, does this car have an airbag or not? Is this car our brakes going to work? Because when you buy it, those are the default things you assume. The safety is the primary factor, which is already baked in. So that's how we have to start to consider our other aspects of life too. The safety has to be built in by default by these standards and guidelines. So our users, our customers, they can just go buy these things and feel safe using these things. So government has a tremendous role to play globally on these things.
Yes, you make some great points about we need cyber hygiene as well as personal hygiene during this pandemic era. Hey, this has been a wonderful interaction and conversation about cybersecurity, the laws, and the challenges that we face. Now I'd like to ask if we have any concluding comments. Jim, maybe you could give us your final thoughts and any projects you're working on. Jim?
Sure, yeah. So thanks again for the opportunity to join this distinguished panel. So let me put it this way. I think the bad news of all the pandemic, amongst many things, is that we as a society, from individual people to companies and governments, are being forced into making decisions and into change at a pace that we've never been faced with before. And because of that, we're going to make mistakes. Productivity mistakes, privacy mistakes, security mistakes. But on the other hand, we're also going to make discoveries and make progress. And that's the real good news, the silver lining of all this. We're going to be making progress and discoveries and advancements that would have otherwise taken years, if not decades. So we hear this cliche, we're all in this together. And we hear that a lot. And usually it comes from a company or an individual who has everything they need towards a group who does not. But on the other hand, that said, it is true in the sense that it will take every one of us, all industries, all functions within companies, all governments, to find the right solutions that get us through this and make us stronger on the other side. And I have to believe that's where we're going to end up. We're going to have stronger, with better productivity, better health, better ways of doing business and living our lives. And so that's what keeps me going in the job that I have, and I think that we all share that.
Great points, Jim. Thank you very much. It's about approaching 0100, or that's 1 a.m. in Israel. So, Esti, do you want to give us your thoughts, final thoughts?
Sure. So first and foremost, Garry and Adriana, thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this amazing panel. It was great to share thoughts with everyone, with such knowledgeable individuals. So I would like to make two final points. Cyber is a dual domain. It entails huge opportunities, but also huge threats. So if you are a decision maker within a nation state, especially a developing country, and you would like to establish a cybersecurity center or cybersecurity ecosystem, in order, on one hand, to protect yourselves from the cyber threats, to protect your ecosystem from the cyber threats, and on the other hand, to be able to create economical opportunities for your country, to actually move the needle on your GDP, please don't hesitate to contact us. If you're an individual listening to us, working from home, utilizing cyberspace in order to be productive, in order to work, in order to access your online banking, well, please do practice cyber hygiene. First and foremost, consider your password. It's probably not strong enough. It's a good time to change it to something stronger. Two-factor authentication does wonders. Again, please do consider that. And if you are allowing your children to play on your work computer, well, it would be better not to do that. Maybe have them play on an iPad or something, but it doesn't marry well with your confidential information that you are using for your work. So thank you very much again for this opportunity.
Excellent comments, Esti. Aanchal, your final thoughts. You're an inspiration to all young women looking into the STEM program, but your final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Adriana and Garry. I am so humbled to be on this panel, looking at everyone's experience and backgrounds. I would say that for organizations, as their workforce has become remote, the challenge is even huge. I think, Garry, you mentioned, or someone mentioned that perimeter, there's no perimeter anymore. You cannot do perimeter security. Everyone is everywhere. So it's what we call a zero trust model. And organizations have to get onto this zero trust model if they haven't already. Otherwise, it's going to get just tougher and tougher with time. And Esti briefly mentioned some of the things which are important for this zero trust model is your multi-factor authentication. You cannot just leave your workforce using passwords which they may be reusing across multiple sites, which may be easily crackable because that's their pet's name or something simple. And so having that multi-factor authentication is very important, and organizations need to focus on the endpoint security, what are the endpoint detection and monitoring they can do for employees. And I'm not talking about the keystroke logging or monitoring whether they are sitting in their chairs, but looking at if they have by mistake downloaded any malware. So running that antivirus, doing that monitoring and alerting to make sure their environment, their laptops, whatever devices they are using, they're still safe. Ensuring the hard disk is encrypted by default. So some of these controls which we were not doing by default earlier, now it's the time when we have to do these things by default, because we are in a very different time now.
Yes, I think 1,000 people were polled and almost 600 had the word password as their password or password one. So
1, 2, 3 or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have a password with a password.
Yes. And as Casey Kasem once said, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars. And that is Jose, whose feet are firmly planted on the ground, but he's been out amongst the stars. Do you have any wrap up for us, Jose?
Sure do, Gary. Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to say thank you very much. And I too am very humbled to be amongst everyone here, being able to talk about this subject, which is near and dear to my heart. You know, I left NASA as a US NASA astronaut in 2012 and began my company called Tierra Luna Engineering. And part of my efforts have been, well, first of all, we helped Mexico procure and launch 3 commercial communication satellites. And then I'm helping attract investment into Mexico. And part of the issues that I see is that countries like Mexico, you know, have a very weak, and some other countries don't have an existing cyber ecosystem. And then to make them change over, it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. Like, you know, I would equate it to the fact that if you go into a very underdeveloped country that has no water, electricity, or phone system, and now you bring in the new technology, well, you're not going to bring them up by putting telephone pole wires. You're going to put cell phone towers. And they're going to use cell phones. So they're going to jump right into what the latest and greatest technology is. And that's what we're trying to do to these countries that don't have a viable cyber ecosystem. So it's a big challenge to do. And so we have to convince them. And like Esti said, I think the way you convince them is you convince them that it has a positive effect on their GDP. But again, the downside of it is that it probably takes longer than an election cycle. And that's the big challenge. But aside from that, you know, other things that I've been doing is I'm an author of 3 books. I've written a children's book, a middle reader book, and my autobiography, Reaching for the Stars, of how I became an astronaut from migrant farm worker, first generation American, parents from Mexico, to become an astronaut and flew into space. The story was so interesting enough that Netflix picked it up, and they're going to do a movie about my life story. And then the other thing that I'm doing is I'm coming full circle with my with what I started off with. I started off in agriculture, picking fruits and vegetables and grapes. And now I'm happy to announce I have a little small vineyard. And this year I'm going to come out with my own wine. It's called Tierra Luna Cellars. I'll come up with a white wine.
We'll have to try it, right? We have to.
Absolutely. It should come out about March timeframe of next year.
Wow, what a great conversation. Those are some real experts with diverse backgrounds and nationalities, and it gives you a worldwide perspective that we're all in this together. Now, it is so comprehensive and so challenging, the issue of cybersecurity. Individuals watching this might say, what can I do today? Well, I'll tell you, just as Esti said, we need to practice cyber hygiene. Do you realize that in 2020, the top 10 passwords used by individuals at home are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1234, 1234, I love you, COVID-19, and password with a capital P, password with lowercase p. I mean, people, why do you think home security cameras are being hacked? We've seen that on 60 Minutes. Why do you think machinery is manipulated? Because people are using poor passwords, and don't be surprised when your home security camera is hacked by a knucklehead.
And I think, Gary, a lot of people are overwhelmed, and there's so many passwords for everything that you're on, and your brain just doesn't take that many passwords, and you can't really remember everything. So they're taking the simple way to deal with this challenge. And maybe something that they are not aware of is that there are special apps out there that will actually create a password for you and store that password. I think one of them is Dashlane. So you might consider getting one of these apps that will actually create a password and store it for you. So when you need to get into your bank account or your email or some of these more challenges, accounts that you rarely get into, but all of a sudden you've forgotten the password, there are apps out there that will create this for you. And this is great for our students, but this is also great for the elderly and for those individuals that are so busy and always multitasking. You just can't remember everything, and writing these down in a journal or keeping them somewhere else is not secure. So you might consider an app.
Right. And also, you might want to think about two-factor authentication, so to double your security. But people are being hacked by just individual hackers out there. But peer competitors, nation states that are attacking, the Pentagon gets attacked 10,000 times a day. Federal government, each entity gets attacked about a similar amount of time. So we have to be 100% secure. These peer nation states only have to get through 1% of the time to make a difference.
There are just so many different ways of looking at this new space that you might want to consider being a little bit more creative.
Absolutely. Also, we need a level playing field as far as technology goes, not just here in the United States, but abroad. And what brought that to highlight to me right now in my local community here in the 7th largest city in the United States, there's an area where the COVID-19 cases are the greatest, and it's the low-income neighborhoods who don't all have internet access or computers or laptops. So to get them information about vaccines, council people are going door to door. But so there's a lot of technology gaps, and you don't want those gaps to widen so that the poor communities get even poorer or more downtrodden when it comes to technology. Also, internationally, we don't want to leave anyone behind. And I think one of the largest continents in the world is Africa. And isn't there some things being done there by non-government organizations or NGOs, Adriana? There
is one. There's one that stands out for me, which is called Telecom for Good. And that organization is really working at this point, focused on several different programs in Africa and trying to get the technology to the people. So it's interesting. We've got so many different groups that are trying to collaborate with one another and are really working hard, especially during this pandemic, to try to make this a more level playing field. But it's going to be tough. So to the extent you can collaborate or you wish to participate, now's the time to do it. Now's the time to jump in because it's needed. And there are a lot of people out there that are reaching out.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a tremendous conversation, and we definitely want to thank our 4 guests who were across the globe when they called in today. So thank you, Jim, Jose, Aanchal, Esti, for joining us today and contributing to our thought process on a hybrid workforce and cybersecurity going forward in 2021.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And we want to thank Price College for supporting the Sanford Hall Report. And you can go to their website to get more information about Adriana Sanford and myself and the Sanford Hall Report. So everybody have a happy new year and a healthy new year, and let's go get that vaccine.
Take care. Bye-bye, Gary.